Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that smells historically awful. You're not a knight, you're not a merchant, monk, or minstrel. You're a medieval gong farmer, which is a polite way of saying you deal in poo, and not in a metaphorical sense. Your hands, your boots, your very existence are steeped in the communal excrement of 14th century humanity. Congratulations, you're essential and universally avoided. It's evening now, and as the sun dips lazily behind the crooked skyline of timber and thatch, you rise not from a velvet bed, but from a straw mattress that smells faintly of mildew and regret. The mattress sags like your back will in 10 years. The rats in the corner don't even scurry away anymore. You've become roommates, somewhere outside. Someone's finishing their prayer or supper, or maybe their fourth mug of ale. You, however, are about to go to work. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your tiny hovel sits just beyond the boundary of what the town calls civil. The people within the walls are law-abiding citizens. The people outside the walls are you, by edict. You're not allowed to live among them, not because of crime, but because of stench. The bylaws don't say it that way. Of course, they're full of flowery old English, like to preserve the pleasant airs of the town proper. But everyone knows it means don't bring your dung-covered self near the bakery. You roll out of bed fully dressed, because let's face it, your work clothes are your pyjamas, and your funeral attire, should the cesspit claim you tonight. Your boots are cracked. Your shirt is a stiff mystery of layers sweat, mud, and God knows what else. There's a hole in your left sleeve where a rat chewed through last summer. You left it unrepaired to give him a second chance. Outside, the air is still. There's a faint breeze, which is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing, because in summer, the wind offers relief. A curse, because it also carries the scent of every latrine, gutter, and ditch the town has chosen to forget. You check your gear shovel. Rope, small bucket, lantern, backup lantern, all present. Your shovel is your sword. Its handle is worn smooth by years of scooping what others flush in the future. Its blade is chipped from a lifetime of unexpected rocks, bones, and once a clay statue of a goat doing something anatomically confusing. You start your walk into the belly of the town. The streets are mostly empty now, save for the occasional drunkard who mistakes you for a demon and mutters an apology to St. Cuthbert. That's fine. You like the peace during the day. People look at you with that tight-lipped expression that says, "Thank you for your service, but please stay 6 feet back and maybe downwind at night." The judgment goes to bed and leaves the alleys quiet. Your first stop is known locally as the Echo House. It's a tenement near the river, where the privy is stacked precariously above a wooden chute. The latrine feeds directly into a cesspit, built by someone who thought gravity would solve everything. It didn't. The chute is cracked, and every step you take near it sounds like a creak from a horror story. The boards moan, the walls weep, and every rat within a mile has real estate in this pit. You light your lantern and peer down. The cesspit greets you like an old friend who's let himself go. The surface is uneven, thick and sludgy in places, watery in others. Bubbles rise slowly and pop with the faintest plop, like a resigned sigh from the underworld. You've named this one Gregory, not sure why. It just felt right. You tie your rope to a nearby beam and test the knot. There's a moment every single time when you stare into the dark mouth of the pit and think this is it. Not because you're dramatic, because the numbers are real. Historians still argue how many gong farmers died in their line of work, but most agree that asphyxiation, drowning, and ceiling collapse were not uncommon. The walls of these pits aren't reinforced. The air inside isn't exactly breathable. And if your rope fails, well, let's just say Richard the Raker isn't a one-off tale. You descend carefully, 1 foot at a time, trying not to look down, which is hard because down is all there is. The smell hits harder the closer you get. It's not just bad, it's layered. Acrid ammonia at the top, thick methane the deeper you go, and underneath it all, a sour sweet rot that makes your tongue curl and your eyes water. You once tried stuffing your nose with herbs. That was a mistake. Now everything just smells like time and human failure. At the bottom, your boots sink with a disgusting squish. You find yourself ankle deep in history's worst soup. This is where tonight's shift begins. You take the first shovelful, and the sound it makes somewhere between a slurp and a wet sigh lets you know this pit is ripe. You fill the bucket, tie it to the rope, and tug once. Your assistant up top, a boy named Ned who smells only slightly worse than you, begins hauling. It's a rhythm. Scoop, lift, tug, dump, repeat. It's meditative. In the way that slowly, losing your soul might be, you hum a little to yourself. Something to break the silence. Maybe that chant the monks sang when you passed their priory last week, about blessed waters. The irony doesn't go unnoticed. After about an hour, your muscles are screaming, your back is a question mark, and your sense of dignity is somewhere floating near the surface. But the job isn't done until you can see the bottom, or at least until the pit stops resisting your shovel like it's holding secrets. You pause to rest and wipe your brow. A fly lands on your lip. You don't even bother swatting it. You've reached that level of professional numbness where body and brain agree this is your life now. A strange gurgle erupts from the far side of the pit. You stare. A bubble the size of your fist swells and pops. That's the thing about this job. There's always a possibility of gas ignition. You heard a story once about a farmer whose lantern set off an explosion that blew half his eyebrows off. He now works in the fields. People respect fields. Suddenly, a splash above. Ned's dropped a bucket. It lands a foot from you, sending a brown tidal wave across your boots. You look up and he waves sheepishly. You say nothing. Words are useless in the face of betrayal. Eventually, you climb back up, legs trembling, breath shallow. Your hands are blistered, your boots heavier, and your soul slightly dimmer. Ned hands you a hunk of bread as a peace offering. You take it. It tastes like everything else, now damp and faintly awful. 1 pit down, 4 more to go before morning, and as you trudge toward the next house of easement, you wonder briefly what your life might have been if you'd taken that monk's offer to join the monastery instead of turning it down because you weren't into chanting. But there's no time for regrets. The next cesspit is older, deeper, and rumoured to house a ghost. And that, of course, is where you're headed now. The next house is worse. You know it before you arrive, because you remember the smell. Some scents haunt you. This one clings to your lungs like smoke, only heavier, wetter, and morally offensive. You round a corner where 2 cats hiss at you, either because you're an omen of bad fortune, or just a walking buffet of odours. And there it is, the pit at Widow Mags's tenement. It's not technically her responsibility to keep the cesspit clear. The landlord is supposed to hire you, but the landlord also believes that sanitation is God's work, and therefore optional. So now it's overflowing, and you've been called in under emergency circumstances, which, in the gong farmer world, means someone fainted last night trying to use it, and we're worried the fumes might reach the bakery next door. You nod at the boy Ned and tighten the strap of your lantern. It's darker here. The alley lined with leaning timber houses that groan in the wind like arthritic men. The door to the privy is open, and even from the street you can see a faint glisten in the wood moisture. Maybe, or something far less poetic. You don't ask, you don't knock, you just enter. This one's deep. You've worked pits like this before, older constructions, dug by hand decades ago. before any sort of city ordinance decided there should be minimum depths or maximum terror. The hole beneath the seat is wide, dark and echoing. You can't see the bottom, which means there's either too much shadow or too much material. A gag reflex bubbles up in your throat, but you've trained yourself well. You count to 5, breathe through your mouth, and tie the rope to a hook bolted into the wall. It was put there by a previous gong farmer who was wise enough to install a permanent anchor. You mentally thank that poor soul and then begin your descent. This is where the real work begins. The cesspit swallows your lantern's light as you lower yourself, 1 foot at a time, into a vertical tunnel of human history. Brick walls slick with condensation, or something pretending to be. It surrounds you. The air gets thicker, hotter. You've learned to recognise the signs when your lungs start to twitch. It's time to pause. You can't afford to pass out down here. No one survives unconsciousness in a cesspit. You stop on a ledge about halfway down, just enough to let the heat rise away from your face, above. Ned is a dim silhouette, the rope dangling like a lifeline, below. The surface of the waist shimmers faintly in the lantern light. This one's definitely fresh. You're not even ankle deep yet and already it's reacting to your presence, bubbling like some angry stew that knows what's coming. You hop down the last few feet with a careful squelch. The ground is uneven, not dirt, not stone, just layers of, well, everything people hope never to think about after it leaves their bodies. There are fragments of straw, hay, a button, a dead rat curled like a comma at the edge of your boot. You try not to look too closely. Sometimes the worst thing about this job is recognising something. You begin to shovel. Each scoop is heavy. The deeper you go, the more resistance the waste gives, as if it has decided it quite likes being here and objects to your interference. You talk to it, sometimes, not because you expect it to listen, but because it helps to imagine it as something vaguely alive and therefore beatable. "Come on, Gregory Jr., you mutter, time to move on." Ned hauls the first bucket up, his small arms working overtime to keep pace. He's quiet tonight, probably tired or afraid. You told him earlier about the time your cousin dropped a lantern into a cesspit and the whole thing lit up in a ball of green-blue fire. That wasn't nice of you, but then again, this isn't a nice job. The fumes start working their way into your head around the third bucket. You feel it behind your eyes first, a dull throb like a headache made of steam. Then in your chest a strange tightness, like trying to breathe through wool. You know these symptoms. This is methane, and it means you need to finish fast or climb out. The choice, as always, is puke now and feel better, or wait and pass out. You choose the first. It's loud and unpleasant, but it works. You feel clearer after. Ned pretends not to hear, which you appreciate. The boy is learning respect, or at least survival etiquette. You wipe your mouth with the sleeve of your shirt, same one you used to wipe your face 2 minutes earlier. Efficiency. You keep working. The bucket goes up, comes down. The waste rises in neat piles beside the pit, ready to be carted away at sunrise. The city council doesn't care how you remove it, just that it's gone before market stalls open. There was a scandal last year when a barrel of night soil leaked outside the fishmonger's stall. No one touched seafood for a week. Your shovel hits something solid. Not stone, not wood, you kneel to check. It's metal, a small box, half rotted, but still sealed. You dig it out carefully, turning it in your hands. Could be anything. A family heirloom, a forgotten stash, a chamber pot with dreams. You open it, inside coins, maybe 20, worn smooth, but still spendable. You don't smile. Smiling makes you inhale, but you do feel the subtle lift of fortune. Finders keepers is an unspoken rule of the gong trade. Whatever you recover while knee-deep in muck is yours. You tuck the box inside your coat. It clinks against your ribs as you return to work. You fill 3 more buckets. the pit is halfway done. That's when the walls creak. Not a metaphor. The actual brick walls, they shift slightly, the mortar whispering under the pressure of years. You freeze. This is your nightmare. Not rats, not disease, collapse. The weight of a building and all its waste pressing inward like a slow-moving fist. Historians still debate how often cesspits collapsed with people inside. Some say it was rare. Others claim the records were deliberately erased because no one wanted to admit their cousin drowned in what was essentially a medieval toilet. You, however, believe it happens just enough. You shout to Ned, "Pull me up now." The rope jerks, the bricks groan again. You scramble upward, half climbing, half slipping. Slime coats the wall. Your boot loses traction. You slide a foot, then two. Before regaining grip, Ned pulls with everything he has, at the top. You fling yourself out just as a small chunk of wall breaks loose and splashes into the pit below. Silence. You lay on the ground, panting, coated in filth, hands trembling. Ned leans over you, eyes wide. He doesn't ask if you're okay. He doesn't have to. You're alive. That's enough. After a moment, you both start laughing. It's not funny, not even close, but something about it, the absurdity, the closeness. The stink makes it impossible not to. Laughter is your only real armour against the job. You sit up, wipe your face, and look at the pit. Still half full, still dangerous, but you'll come back to it tomorrow, after it settles. For now, you move on. Next house, next hole, next dance with death in a bucket. Because even when the walls close in and the fumes steal your breath, you're a gong farmer and the work never ends. You've only just caught your breath from the last cesspit when it begins the night soil shuffle. That's what you call this next part. Mostly to keep yourself from screaming, or crying, or both. Because digging waste from the pit is only half the job. The other half, arguably the worse half, is getting it out of the city without dropping, sloshing, or emotionally unravelling along the way. It's close to midnight now, and the only light is your lantern bobbing on the cart handle, casting grotesque shadows of you and Ned across the damp cobblestones. The cartwheels creak in slow protest beneath the weight of 6 barrels of fresh human regret. You try not to think about what's inside them, even though the smell has seeped into your very bones. It's no longer outside you, it is you. This is the part of the night when you begin to hallucinate slightly. You're not crazy, just sleep-deprived, methane-logged, emotionally pickled. You've done this route so many times you could walk it blindfolded. And sometimes you swear you have. The ruts in the road guide your cart like rails. Right at the market square, left past the well. Another right when you see the statue of St. Cuthbert's sheep. You and Ned don't speak now. It's not silence out of fatigue, but necessity. Words, if you dare breathe enough to form them. Only remind your lungs that they're still functioning, and that functioning includes taking in the full bouquet of what you're transporting. You glance down at the barrels. They jiggle slightly with each bump. That's unsettling. Night soil shouldn't jiggle. You make a mental note to check one of the lids at the next rest stop. Unfortunately, the next rest stop is called the Alley of Unfortunate Slopes. The name isn't official, but every gong farmer knows it. It's the steepest incline in the city, and it's paved with uneven stones, slicked with rain. Grime, and occasionally something worse. It curves downhill like a grim amusement ride, designed by someone with a vendetta against your knees. You brace yourself at the top. Ready, you whisper to Ned, though it's less a question and more a prayer. He nods. You begin to push, slowly at first, then faster. Gravity does most of the work, and that's the problem. The cart takes on a life of its own, rattling forward with wild enthusiasm. You dig in your heels, gripping the handles with white knuckles as the barrels slosh ominously behind you. One bad bump and the lid could pop, and no amount of blessings from the town priest will undo that trauma. Halfway down, you hit a loose stone, The cart lurches sideways. A barrel tilts. Time slows. You reach out, Ned shouts. The wheel catches. By some miracle, or perhaps the sheer willpower of your ancestors, who also smelled terrible, you recover control just before the entire load flips. The barrel wobbles, but settles. You breathe. It's not relief. Exactly. It's just a temporary absence of screaming. At the bottom of the hill, you stop and check the lid. It's cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough to leak, not fluid. Worse, scent. A wave of stink pours upward, as if the barrel had been waiting for just the right moment to unleash its inner monologue. You gag. Ned turns green. A rat scurries past, pauses, then turns back the way it came. You nail the lid shut with a scrap of wood and resume the march. As you push the cart through the old quarter, you pass a house with a candle still lit in the window. A woman leans out slightly, catches a whiff, and slams it shut like she's sealing off a room in a plague house. You try not to take it personally. You really do. But it's hard when even the air seems to hate you. This is your reality, no matter how vital your job is. You're invisible during the day and cursed at night. The clean streets, the fresh air, the safe drinking wells, they all rely on your work, and yet no one speaks your name unless it's followed by a wince or an accusation. You remember once, years ago, when a nobleman's wife dropped her ring into the privy during a feast. They called for a gong farmer, not you, someone more presentable to retrieve it. He found it. Of course, it wasn't hard. The ring was still warm, but when he offered it back, she wouldn't take it. She had a servant hold out a velvet cloth, and she snatched it like it was cursed. She never said thank you. That night, the gong farmer cried, not because he was offended, but because, for a moment, he thought maybe this time someone would look him in the eye. You shake off the memory. There's no time for that now. The dump site awaits. Outside the city walls, there's a patch of ground called the lay stall. It's not marked on maps, but everyone knows it. That's where you take the waste before sunrise. Sometimes it's hauled onto dung boats and taken further out. Sometimes it's sold to real farmers who actually know what to do with it. Your job is just to get it there. The gates creak open. The guard waves you through without speaking. He doesn't need to ask who you are. Your arrival is preceded by scent. As you roll the cart onto the field, you feel the tension in your shoulders begin to unwind. Not relax. That's not the word, but release. The job is almost over, and that means you've survived another shift. You dump the barrels one by one. The sound they make as they tip is hard to describe. Somewhere between a thud and a wet sigh, followed by a slow, reluctant slosh. The wastelands in designated pits, already crawling with flies. You wipe your hands, even though it's a pointless gesture, and sit down on an overturned bucket to breathe. Beside you, Ned lowers himself onto a rock. You ever think about quitting? He asks suddenly. You glance at him. He's 12, so maybe 13. Too young to be asking that question seriously, but too old to believe he hasn't already thought it. Every night, you reply, "Why don't you?" You look out over the lay stall, where steam rises gently from the piles, like smoke from an ungodly cauldron. The sky above it is just beginning to change colour, the first hints of pre-dawn filtering in. Because somebody has to, you say. Ned nods. He doesn't need more explanation. You both sit in silence as the light grows. Somewhere, a rooster crows. Somewhere else, someone flushes a chamber pot out a window, and the world begins again. You stand, stretch your back, and gather your tools. There's one more cesspit to clear before dawn. You know it well. It's tucked behind the butcher's quarter, and if you don't empty it before the market opens, you'll be scraping blood and dung off the same stones. You and Ned load the empty barrels, relight the lantern, and begin the walk back into town. The night soil shuffle isn't over. It never really is. And as you disappear down the cobbled road, boots squelching softly, you remind yourself of one final grim comfort. You may be knee-deep in filth, but at least you're not the one creating it by the time you reach the next pit. The sky has faded from inky black to that awkward grey that isn't quite dawn, but isn't night either. The kind of light that makes your surroundings look worse, every slime-coated wall, every glistening puddle, every rat still munching happily on something you'd rather not identify. It's not a beautiful sunrise, it's just a slow reveal of what you already knew was there. This latrine is built behind a bakery, which under any other circumstance would be cause for joy, but not tonight. Tonight, it just means one thing: you have exactly 47 minutes before the baker starts rolling dough and opens the shutters. If he catches even a whiff of what you're doing, he'll send his apprentice out with a broom and a bucket of flour to chase you off like you're a walking yeast infection. So you work fast. Ned helps you tie the rope. This pit is smaller, shallower, but that doesn't make it easier. In some ways, it's worse. There's no room to move, no airflow, and the walls feel like they're leaning inward, as if they've given up on maintaining architectural dignity. You brace yourself and start scooping again. Your arms are tired, not just the kind of tired you get from a long day. This is the marrow-deep exhaustion that feels like it lives in your soul. You don't remember what your hands look like clean. You don't remember what it's like to wake up without your joints popping like old hinges. You don't even remember what Ned looks like when he's not partially obscured by steam, shadow, or airborne particles of other people's diets. Still, you keep going, because nobody else will. No one in the city wants to be a gong farmer, not even other gong farmers. Half the men you know only got into it because they lost a bet, owed a debt, or were too injured to fight in wars, but not injured enough to be useless. You remember old John. He was a cooper once, made barrels, honest work. Then he lost a hand, an accident with a saw, and no one would hire him. But you took him in, showed him how to use a shovel with one hand and a looped leather strap for leverage. He worked until the day the floor collapsed under him, and by the time you dug him out, well, there wasn't much left to send back to his wife, except his boots and a handful of coins you found in his pocket. They gave you a loaf of bread at the funeral, said thank you. You didn't eat it. You shovel faster now. Maybe out of anger, maybe out of habit. It's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins these days. Ned clears his throat. You hear about the new privy going up near the west gate. You grunt. Brick-lined, he says, almost in awe. Ventilation shafts. Proper access ladders. They're calling it a model latrine. You snort. Model for who nobles don't dig their own pits. Still, he shrugs. Maybe it'll last longer than a season. You don't respond. You've seen fancy latrines before. They fall apart like all the others. Moisture seeps in. Rats chew the corners. People overload them. And eventually, someone like you has to crawl in and sort it out. There's no such thing as a better privy. Only newer ones that haven't betrayed you yet. You finish the last scoop and tie the bucket. Ned hauls it with quiet effort. He doesn't complain. And that's something a lot of boys whine. You used to, once, back when you were him. The bakery door opens just as you're tossing the last bucketful into the cart. A burst of warm, buttery air escapes fresh dough. Yeast, comfort. You and Ned freeze. The baker peers out, squints, then scowls. He says nothing, just slams the door again. Small victory. You move on. The next stretch is a quiet one. No pits to clean for a while. Just the long road between you and the manor house on the hill. You hate that one. Not because it's worse, though it is, but because of what it represents. The manor sits behind high stone walls, with guards who wrinkle their noses like you're a disease and not a human. You've cleaned that cesspit 6 times this year. The noble family never says a word. They leave coins in a pouch by the gate, like you're some kind of foul-smelling delivery boy. One time, a lady dropped her glove over the fence. You picked it up. It was white silk, embroidered, delicate. You held it for exactly 3 seconds before a guard shouted, "Drop it, filth." So you did, into a bucket of night soil. They never asked for it back. You and Ned arrive just as the moon begins to fade. The guards don't say anything this time. They just point. The pit is enormous, deep, wide with a reinforced rim and proper scaffolding. In theory, it's safer. In reality, it's just more expensive to die in. You descend slowly, carefully, listening for the groan of the structure, the whisper of betrayal in the stones. This pit smells different, richer. Somehow, like even the waste is better fed. There are scraps of linen in here, remnants of roasted meats, bits of jewellery. You pause to retrieve a brooch, half swallowed by the muck. Silver, probably worth something. You tuck it into your coat. You think about how strange it is that the people who produce the most waste are often the ones who think they're above you. You're elbow deep in their refuse, literally cleaning up after them, and yet they pretend you don't exist, or worse, that you shouldn't. Historians still argue whether the noble classes in medieval cities ever fully acknowledged the work of the sanitation class. Some believe certain cities granted limited protections or bonuses for those in the gong trade. Others think we were just ghosts, functional, necessary, but never truly seen. You know which theory you believe. Back at the top, Ned waits with a cloth over his mouth, not because of the smell he's long since adjusted, but because it makes him feel like a doctor. You don't have the heart to tell him that no doctor in the city would touch this job. You empty your last bucket. The sun is rising now. You look down at your hands, cracked, blistered, caked in things you gave up identifying long ago, and yet they're steady, strong, alive. There's something comforting in that. As you gather your tools and begin the walk home, you realise something you haven't said out loud in years. You're proud of what you do. No one thanks you. No one writes songs about you. But tomorrow, someone will walk through that manor, take a seat in luxury, and never once think about what lies beneath. And that's because of you. Ned kicks a stone down the path. So, breakfast. You nod. If the bread isn't cursed, I'll consider it. And with that, you both turn toward the edge of town, the barrels sloshing gently behind you, the streets waking up just as your shift winds down. The city never saw you, but it needed you. And tomorrow night, you'll be right here again, unseen, unthanked, and absolutely essential. The city sleeps through most things: drunken arguments, rats scratching under floorboards, even the occasional church bell rung at the wrong hour. But there's one sound it never hears: the creak of a wooden lid being lifted over a cesspit at 3 a.m. Because that's the kind of work only children do. Not because it's safe, far from it. It's just they're the only ones small enough to fit where grown men won't. And so, when the cesspit entrances are too narrow, too unstable, too deep, or angled oddly under the floorboards of a crooked tenement, you do what every seasoned gong farmer does: you send in the raker. Tonight your raker is Tom. Tom is 12, maybe, or 10 with a hard life. No mother, no known father. He came to you filthy, angry, and hungry. You said he could stay if he earned his bread. He didn't flinch when you handed him the rope and told him what the job entailed. Just nodded and asked if he got his own shovel. That's when you knew he'd last. He's already waiting at the next pit, crouched under the sagging floor of an alehouse that's famous for its sour beer and infamous for what it lets drain beneath it. You kneel beside him. You sure? He nods. I fit last week. That was last week. Pub owner added a beam. Tom shrugs, then drops to his belly and begins wriggling through the crawl space like a ferret in boots. You hear a grunt, a shuffle, then the soft, wet sound of impact. He's in. Ned whispers beside you, holding the rope. Didn't even swear this time. A moment later, Tom's voice floats up from the darkness. Reckon it's half full. Smells better than Tuesday. You've learned not to ask what that means. He gets to work his tiny hands, scraping the bottom of the pit with a curved iron scoop, raking it into manageable piles. From there, you pull it up by bucket, load by load, each one heavier than the last. It's slower this way, but safer, at least. That's what you tell yourself. Truth is, it's still dangerous. You've known kids who got stuck. One who broke his arm when a support beam gave way. Another who climbed into a dry pit. only to stir up a nest of wasps that had made their home inside a half-digested deer carcass someone had, for reasons unknown, thrown down there. That boy still twitches when he hears buzzing. Historians still argue about how widespread child labour was in medieval sanitation. Some suggest gong farming was a family trade passed from father to son, like blacksmithing or cobbling. Others claim it was a last resort for orphans and debtors, thrown into the filth as punishment or desperation. You suspect it was both because that's exactly what Tom is. A boy with no family and no options. Just a scoop, a rope, and the faintest hint of a future. As the pit slowly empties, Tom sings to himself a tavern song. You recognise the tune, something about a pig who married a nun and stole ale from the bishop's mule cart. You hum along. Ned rolls his eyes, but he's grinning. You like this part, as strange as it sounds. Not because it's pleasant, it isn't, but because it's the closest thing to community your line of work offers. The three of you, labouring together under the city skin, unseen but tied together by ropes and responsibility. Tom finishes with a grunt and a slurp as he crawls out, covered in filth and pride. Found a brooch, he says, holding up a tiny copper oval caked in waste. Might polish up. You nod. Yours, if you don't die next week. I'll try my best, he says, and means it. You hand him a crust of bread from your coat. It's stale and lumpy, but food is food. He devours it in silence, while you and Ned repack the cart. The road to the next house is long and quiet, winding past sleeping shops and shuttered windows. The only sound is the low groan of your cart wheels and the occasional cough from Ned. Who's been breathing in more than his fair share of vapours lately? You should rest tomorrow. You tell him. He shakes his head. You'll need help for the castle job. You wince, he's right. The local lord recently sent word one of the guardrobes in his west tower is backed up. Apparently, it's causing a smell most unbecoming for courtship. The note was scented with lavender. Like that would erase the image of highborn ladies trying to sip wine while breathing through sleeves. Still, castle jobs pay well. Better yet, they sometimes feed you. And if the pit is deep enough, you might even find coins or rings. Nobles are careless like that, especially when drunk. But it'll be a big job. You'll need Ned on the pulley, Tom on the rake. And maybe that wiry new lad from the South End. What's his name? Alfie. He said he once cleaned out a cloister latrine with just a broom handle and a sheep's skull. You never asked follow-up questions. As you walk, you pass the remains of an old latrine that collapsed last winter. The pit is still cordoned off, the earth too unstable to risk. But you stop, just for a second, and stare into the hole. That's where Garrel died. He was small like Tom, faster, loud-mouthed, but brave. One night, in a rush, he went in too fast. You told him to wait. He didn't. The walls gave way. You remember the sound, the dull whoomph of shifting soil, the sudden splash, the way the rope went slack. You dug for hours. Found his boot, his cap, nothing else. You never filled in the pit. Not out of respect, out of fear. You're not superstitious. But when the wind blows just right, you swear you still hear him whistling. You move on. At the next house, Tom crawls under the floorboards without being asked. Ned sets up the buckets. You adjust your gloves, cracked and useless though they are, and begin again. This is what your life has become. A series of pits, boys, ropes, and nights so dark that even memory feels like it's wrapped in soot. And yet, you keep going, because someone has to. Because these boys deserve more than what the world gave them. And because, in a city that calls you filth, you've built something cleaner than most folks will ever know. Loyalty, quiet dignity, and just enough hope to come back tomorrow. The city glows now, not from lanterns or moonlight, but from that peculiar grey-gold haze that arrives just before true morning. You've crossed the threshold from night to dawn. Not that your body notices anymore. At this point, time is just a shape in the air, and the only thing that defines your day is whether the next bucket sloshes or splashes. But you're not heading home yet. No, not when there's still one more cesspit behind the chapel, And rumour has it the bishop dropped a ring down there last week, gold, with a ruby. He's offering 3 whole shillings to whoever finds it, which means, naturally, you plan to find it before you let him know. This is the unspoken rule of your profession, finders keepers, even in filth. And there's so much filth. The chapel cesspit is narrow but deep. One of those treacherous designs built by men who believed ventilation was optional, but eternal damnation for poor sanitation was not. The thing is built like a vertical tunnel into the earth, with just enough space to squeeze a bucket down, barely enough to squeeze you. You've brought your lucky hook, not because it's actually lucky, it's just the only one that hasn't snapped in half yet. It's a long curved iron claw with a bit of twine wrapped around the base for grip. And you've used it to pull up everything from chamber pots to someone's missing wooden leg. Tom eyes the pit and mutters, "Looks deeper than last time." Everything looks deeper when you're exhausted. You reply, tossing a pebble down. It takes 4 seconds to hit. Ned winces. So, we're not sending Tom. Not unless we want him to come back converted. That earns a tired laugh. You lower the bucket slowly, using the hook to stir through the muck. It's a messy job, less like fishing and more like archaeological looting in a bog of sins. Every time the hook snags something, you haul it up, hoping for a glint of gold and praying it's not just another rotting crucifix, or worse, a decaying foot someone forgot to bury properly. The first haul brings up a comb, half sunk in black slop. Not the bishop's, unless he suddenly developed taste in tortoiseshell. The second pull yields a handful of hair ribbons tangled around a cracked mug. Someone's confession. Maybe a story you'll never know, but one that probably ended in tears and indigestion. Then something heavier clinks against the side. You freeze. The bucket tips, and in the muck, you see it a flash of red, caught in slime, ruby, gold band. You barely dare breathe. You hook it carefully, slowly, and pull. It's his ring. You don't cheer, don't shout. Just hold it up silently, turning it in the dim light, watching how it catches the glow like it has no idea where it's been. You don't wipe it. There's no point. You just drop it into a pouch at your belt and look up at Ned. 3 shillings. Easy, he grins. You shake your head. 5 if he thinks we rescued it from the devil himself. 6, Tom suggests. If we tell him it was clutched in the fist of a corpse. You smile faintly. Remind me never to die around you. You finish clearing the pit, though your heart's not in it anymore. You're thinking about the ring, about what it means. A week's wages in one find, maybe 2, if you lie well. This is the secret nobody tells you about being a gong farmer. Sometimes the filth gives back. Not often, not generously, but just enough to make you hope. You found spoons, coins, brooches, knives once. Even a sealed letter wrapped in waxed cloth. Never opened. You burned that one. You don't read other people's secrets, not when they've already been swallowed by the city. The most valuable find you ever made wasn't gold, though. It was a book, a tiny one, leather-bound, pages intact, just a little damp around the edges. Latin writing, with weird symbols in the margins. You couldn't read it. Of course, you're not a scholar, but a friar paid you 10 shillings for it and told you never to mention it again. You didn't, but you remember the look in his eyes, equal parts fear and awe. The cesspits hold more than waste. They hold stories, mistakes, lost loves, hidden crimes, whole lives, flushed away with a sigh in a bucket. Historians still debate just how much wealth passed through the hands of gong farmers. Some claim the finds were rare, mostly exaggerated. Others argue that a clever gong farmer could earn as much in accidental jewellery recovery as he did from actual sanitation. You know the truth lies somewhere in between. Most of the time, it's just dung and despair, but now and then, the pit gives you a reason to keep going. A silver thimble, a polished buckle, a brass token from a tavern that closed 5 years ago. They're not just objects, they're proof. Proof that even in the worst places, something of value can survive. You pack the tools and straighten your back with a groan that sounds like a haunted bellows. The sky is turning orange, now sunrise proper. The chapel bell rings, muffled, like it's still hung over. People are starting to move in the streets, bleary-eyed and wrapped in shawls, unaware that you were crouched beneath their feet not half an hour ago, plucking relics from their latrine like some twisted grave digger of shame. Ned yawns. So what'll you do with the coin? Buy silence. You mutter, yours Tom's, and maybe the bishop's, if he finds out I already pawned the ring. They both laugh, not a big laugh, more of a shared exhale. You start walking. The road is lined with houses that all look the same when you've been up all night. Crooked roofs, muddy paths, curtains fluttering just enough to remind you that the city knows you exist. It just chooses to ignore you until the stink gets too strong. At one corner, a woman tosses a basin of grey water into the gutter. She sees you, hesitates, then retreats inside. Door shut tight. Another reminder, people want clean streets, but not the hands that make them so. It doesn't matter. You walk anyway. At the turn near the east gate, you find something unexpected, a small sack tied with red twine. Just sitting in the middle of the cobbles. You stop. Ned narrows his eyes. Could be a trap. Tom shrugs. Could be breakfast. You open it slowly. Inside, bread, cheese, a coin, a sprig of mint. No note here. Just quiet gratitude. You stand there for a long moment, unsure what to feel. You've never been good at thanks. You're more familiar with curses, shouted insults, people crossing the street to avoid your shadow. This is rare. You hand the food to Tom. He tears into the bread like a wild dog. Grinning, you give Ned the coin. You keep the mint. It's ridiculous, but it smells clean, like it came from a world that doesn't crawl with waste. You hold it to your nose and breathe deeply for the first time in days. You look down at your gloves, crusted and worn, then tuck the mint into your belt next to the bishop's ring. A trophy, a talisman, a reminder. That's somewhere out there. Someone sees what you do, and maybe, just maybe, that means something. By now, the city is fully awake. Chimneys belch thin trails of smoke, doors creak open. Merchants mutter curses as they set up stalls, their breath curling in the crisp morning air. Bakers hawk their wares in song, and children race barefoot through puddles, shouting half-formed insults at one another. You don't belong in this daylight. You belong to the other side of the sun, the hours where everything is still and heavy and soft enough to pretend the world is quiet. But sometimes your work spills over. Sometimes you're still at it when the sun climbs high enough to make shadows vanish. And when that happens, you start to deal with regulations, because even in a world that barely bathes, there are rules about where one may dump dung. This morning, you've got barrels, 3 of them, nearly full. One of them sloshes ominously every time the cart jostles. You know better than to delay. Last month, a gong farmer named Edric lingered too long with his cart behind a butcher's shop. He claimed he was just resting. The city warden claimed he was causing olfactory distress and offensive puddling. Edric spent the night in the stocks with a sign that read, "Purveyor of poo and public menace." Children threw onions. A monk slapped him with a fish. So now you stick to the rules, or at least the idea of them. You're heading to the designated dump ground, a spot outside the city walls. Downwind of everything that matters. It's not a field. Exactly. It's more like a memory of a field. Now sunken and churned from years of disposal, the ground squelches before you even arrive, and 100 crows greet you like you're late for their breakfast. This place has a name, Gaushill, not officially. Of course, official documents call it something noble sounding, like Sanitary Designated Zone South, but no one says that out loud. Gaushill is what the farmers call it, the ones who creep in at night and dig through your piles for fertiliser. Yes, fertiliser. That's the ultimate indignity. You haul this muck by the gallon, at the risk of your health and dignity, only for some smiling cabbage grower to scoop it up, slap it on his garden, and sell you back the lettuce 2 weeks later. You shovel slowly, 1 barrel at a time, by law. You're supposed to dig a trench and cover the waste after dumping, But that law was written by men who've never touched a shovel. So instead, you spread the waste thin over a wide stretch and toss a few half-hearted handfuls of straw over it. That's the trick. Straw equals plausible compliance. As you work, a voice calls from behind. You dumping here or building a moat? It's Gerd, the local watchman. You sigh, not even turning. If I say moat, will you let me finish? He walks up beside you, pinching his nose with a cloth that does absolutely nothing. You're within the zone, but you're too close to the main path. You gesture to the waist-high grass and tyre tracks. That's a path, according to the new map from the city chamber. Yes. You squint, and what happens if I move 20 feet east? You're in the field of Lord Hentley's cousin, agricultural land. And if I move 20 feet west, illegal dumping on church property. You look at him. So you're saying I can dump nowhere? He shrugs. Just dig a trench. You stare at the ground. Then at your barrels. Then at Gerd. There's a rat in barrel 2. You say, still alive? Last I checked. He flinches backward like you pulled a dagger. Fine. I didn't see anything. And just like that, he walks off. That's how it works. Rules, enforcement, bribery, threats of rats. It's a delicate balance. You finish the job, wipe your hands on your apron, not that it helps, and start hauling the empty barrels back to the cart. The wheels creak. Tom is snoring softly in the back, curled under a burlap sack like a pup in a crate. You consider waking him, but no, let him rest. He's earned it. Ned is chewing on a piece of licorice root, which he insists keeps the smell out of his mouth. It doesn't, but it's a tradition. And you don't argue with tradition, not when you're standing ankle deep in Gow's Hill. Think we'll get inspected today, Ned asks. You sigh. Probably. Once a month or whenever the city council remembers your profession exists. Someone from the sanitation authority rides out in a clean robe and polished boots to observe best practices. That phrase always makes you laugh. Last time. The inspector refused to step out of his cart, took one look at the pit, turned green, and waved his hand. Continue as normal. He choked, then left behind a scroll of wax-sealed nonsense about improving urban cleanliness. You kept it, wrapped fish in it the next day. You're not against rules per se, but the rules you follow are written in sweat, scars, and survival, not ink. Like how you never dump near a water source, or how you always test a floorboard with a broomstick before stepping on it, or how you keep a vial of vinegar on you, not because it helps the smell, but because once a doctor told you it might keep the plague off. You do it anyway, because habits are armour. Halfway back to the city, you spot another gong farmer coming the opposite way. Hilda, short, muscular, always chewing cloves. She gives you a nod, you nod back, no words, just mutual respect exchanged like currency. That's your guild. No parchment, no oaths, just men and women and boys and girls, up to their elbows in what everyone else pretends doesn't exist. You pass through the city gate. The guard doesn't look up. He knows your cart by smell. Back on the cobbles, the streets are getting busy. Bakers waving loaves, blacksmiths hammering in rhythm, nobles in too bright clothes stepping carefully to avoid puddles. They never quite succeed. You watch one of them, some minor lordling with more buttons than sense, step right into a slick of water that you're reasonably sure came from a privy 2 blocks up. He curses, his wife gasps. A child nearby laughs until she's yanked away. You smile to yourself. Poetic justice. In a town built on layers of invisible labour, you turn the cart toward the yard. It's not much, just a fenced-off lot behind an abandoned chapel, where you store the barrels, tools, and a bucket of vinegar that hasn't been touched in weeks. You unhitch the donkey, brush him down. He doesn't flinch at the smell anymore, neither do you. Ned collapses on a stool. Tom rolls over in the cart and mutters something about porridge. You sit on a crate and stretch your back. Bones crack like dry sticks. No one will visit today. No one ever does. But you have your ring, your pouch of coins, a mint sprig pressed between 2 slates like a sacred relic. And you have your team broken, filthy, irreplaceable. And when the next regulation rolls through, demanding that all night soil be sorted by type or dated by origin. You'll smile, nod and keep doing it your way, because the city only works because you do, and no amount of parchment can shovel dung. The stink doesn't bother you anymore, not in the way it used to. Once upon a time, it lived in your nostrils like an invasive species, coating your thoughts in a film of sour rot. Now it's background music. You notice it only when it changes, when it sharpens into something new and unwelcome. Like now, you're standing in the alley behind the bakery, where you're meant to empty a small privy bin, and the smell is wrong, not wrong as in extra dead, or someone's had too much cabbage, but wrong in a way that suggests something or someone is in there who shouldn't be. You look at Tom, he looks at you. You both know the smell of fresh dung, fermented waste, rat droppings, mould, wet straw, even the occasional decomposed cat, but this is the smell of intent. You tap the wooden panel twice with your shovel. Nothing. Then you lift the lid. There's a grunt, a hand, a face, a man crouched like a toad, one knee propped against the stone, his arms braced on either side of the narrow chute, balanced inside the privy like a grotesque jack-in-the-box. His eyes go wide when he sees you. God's tooth, he yelps, and tries to yank the lid back down. Too late. You grab the edge and fling it open fully. Tom lets out a strangled laugh behind you. Caught another one, you mutter. He's a privy burglar. Yes, that's a thing. A dirty, real, very stupid thing. People think you're the bottom rung of medieval society, but even you have someone below you. The ones who sneak into latrines not to clean them, but to steal from them. Because where there's muck, there's brass and sometimes silver, especially in taverns, where drunks drop coins from their purses mid-squat, and some desperate men are willing to brave the stench, the filth, and the crushing shame for a chance at a half-shilling that smells like sin. This one's young, maybe 20, pale, smells like sweat and fear. He's got a leather pouch tied to one wrist and a small pronged stick for scooping a thief's version of your sacred tools. Poorly imitated. You sigh. You know the law. I wasn't stealing. He lies. Tom leans over the edge. Then why were you inside a privy? I dropped something. Just retrieving it. While holding a satchel full of other people's coins, Tom raises an eyebrow. The man's sighs times are hard. Not as hard as it'll be sleeping in the stocks with piss-soaked boots. You say, because yes, the punishment for privy burglary is public humiliation. Not just stocks, but the kind placed right next to the public toilets. So everyone knows exactly what you were caught doing. Some towns even added a bell. The gong thief bell, they called it. Just in case your shame needed audio accompaniment. Historians still argue how common privy thieves were. Some claim it was an urban myth, exaggerated by chroniclers with a flair for dramatic filth. Others insist these incidents were frequent enough to require real policy. You, standing here looking down at a man who smells like old sausage and regret, lean toward the latter. Get out. You say, go. He hesitates, perhaps thinking you'll beat him or worse, but you're not cruel, at least, not unnecessarily. He crawls out slowly, his boots squelching with each motion. Tom steps back to avoid the splash zone. You grab him by the arm and drag him to the alley wall, then sit him down with a thump. You pull a crust from your pouch and toss it to him. He stares. You feed me now. I'd rather not chase a starving man into a gutter tomorrow. Eat, then go, if I catch you again. I hand you to the warden personally. He nods, chewing in silence. Tom watches with narrowed eyes, but says nothing. This is your call, and he respects that. You clean the privy yourself faster than usual, partly from anger, partly to get the scent of thievery out of your tools. You've never minded the waste, but there's something sacred about honest filth. When someone sullies it with greed, it taints more than just the air. Later, back in the yard, Tom is quiet. You think he'll come back, he asks. Probably. Why didn't we turn him in? You rinse your gloves in the barrel and watch the water darken. Because I've been that hungry before. Tom nods. Once doesn't ask further. That night, as you prepare for the castle job, you find something tucked inside your cloak pocket. A coin, clean, freshly polished. You glance around, but no one's near. No sign of the thief. Just the coin. A thank you, maybe, or a bribe, or a final apology. You slip it into your pouch and don't mention it. The castle cesspit waits. It's the west tower, the narrowest tower. The kind of tower built for archers with waists the size of turnips. The guardrobe is high up one of those chute systems that carries the waist down through a shaft in the wall, emptying into a stone basin far below. You stand at the base, staring up at the outlet where the waist falls. Guess we're not going in from the top, Ned mutters. No, you sigh. We're going in from the middle. You climb. The scaffolding is barely tied, built by masons who left 3 years ago and never returned. Each plank creaks with secrets. At the 4th window slit, you find your entrance a gap where the guardrobe chute can be accessed by reaching through a crumbling mortar seam. You brace, reach in. It's like sticking your arm into a nightmare. You hook the sludge, pull it back, flick it into the bucket, repeat. There's no treasure here. No rings, no tokens, no accidental drops from careless nobles. Just layer after layer of feast-turned fertilizer, hardened into a mineral that should not exist. It takes an hour just to loosen the upper chamber. 2 more to clear the chute. Your arms ache, your neck burns. At one point, you're fairly certain something wriggled against your palm, and you don't ask questions about that. When it's over, the pit at the base finally begins to drain, and the smell that follows is like old vengeance being released into the air. You lean against the wall, exhausted. From behind, a voice well done. It's the steward, tall, disinterested, wearing a robe so white it practically mocks you. He drops a pouch in your hand. Coins inside, heavy. You glance in. 4 shillings, not 5. Was promised 5, you say quietly. The steward sniffs. Castle budget changed. You say nothing. You don't throw the pouch back, you don't argue, because there are rules, and then there's reality. You pocket the coins and descend in silence. Back in the cart, Tom eyes you. Castle stiff you. 4 shillings. He'll find his boots glued to the floor tomorrow. You grin. Not everything needs revenge, but some things deserve adjustment. You get home just as the stars return. Your knees creak like wood in rain. You don't eat. You don't talk. You just sit on your stool, open your pouch and count. A ring, a mint sprig, a thief's coin, 4 shillings and some copper bits. Not wealth, but enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to wake up tomorrow and shovel again. Because the pit is never empty for long, and neither is the city's appetite for your silence. You wake up in the early dusk, the kind of dusky silence that hums with flies and faint echoes of blacksmith hammers. There's stale bread stuck to the roof of your mouth, and something suspiciously crusty on your left boot. You don't remember stepping in anything, which is, ironically, never a good sign in your line of work. Today isn't a cesspits day, not officially. Today, you're supposed to be doing your day shift. If the night belongs to the gong farmer, the daylight belongs to the scavenger, which is somehow both a promotion and a punishment. See, the city doesn't just have privies, it has gutters, ditches, dung heaps, open drains behind butcher stalls, public corners where people squat and pretend they don't know better, and every now and then, the city decides it doesn't like being quite that filthy, and someone remembers there are people like you whose job it is to make things disappear. So here you are. You trudge through the main square with your flat rake, your wooden scoop, and a cart so warped by time it looks like it was carved from regret. Ned follows behind, yawning, dragging the new burlap sacks the council insists you use because the old ones were a public nuisance. You tried explaining that burlap absorbs nothing, but bureaucracy listens less than a rock. You start with the gutters along Merchant Street. The cobblestones are slick from last night's rain, or possibly ale, or possibly worse. You don't ask, you rake slowly, gathering layers of rotted cabbage leaves, chicken bones, horse droppings, broken pottery, and what you're fairly sure was once a hat. You toss the hat into the sack, Still warm, Ned mutters. You nod. Let's pretend it was soup. Around the corner, the butcher's apprentice waves you down. Behind the stall again, he says, already retreating with a cloth over his nose. You brace yourself. Behind the stall is exactly what you feared, a heap of entrails, discarded hooves, and something that might be a pig's eyeball. The stench punches you in the soul. You step carefully, rake deliberately, and try not to think about whether the pigs ever had names. It takes 30 minutes to clear the pile, 30 minutes of squelching, scraping, retching from Ned, and the occasional, half-hearted prayer. Afterwards, you lean against the stall and wipe your brow. The butcher doesn't pay you. He just grunts, as if your presence has been a minor inconvenience in the grand opera of his life. It's fine. Scavengers don't get tips. You head to the baker's quarter next. Less blood, more crumbs. You gather bits of charred bread, mouldy flour, and the occasional lost shoe. One child follows you for 3 blocks before daring to ask if he can have a stale heel of rye from the sack. You hand it to him without a word. He runs off, grinning like he just stole heaven. You don't blame him. You've eaten worse. You break at midday. Not to eat, there's no time for luxuries like chewing, but to sit on a low step behind the weaver's house and pretend your legs still work. Ned flops beside you, already asleep. You pull out your pouch, turn it over. 6 coins, all copper, 3 of them sticky. You stare at them like they might blink. A passing priest eyes you, not with pity, with suspicion. You smell like sin to him, though you suspect it's just pig bits and failure. Still, he makes the sign of the cross. You return it with a wave. No one likes scavengers, but no one wants to do your job either. It's the same with gong farmers, rat catchers, and the man who scrapes candle wax from church floors. Necessary, contemptible, forgotten. Your society's conscience, buried under a shovel. In the afternoon, the council sends a boy with a scroll. You break the seal and read, by order of the city chamber, all refuse in the west quarter is to be cleared by dusk. Refuse includes, but is not limited to, human waste, animal droppings, spoiled goods, and any debris obstructing public pathways. You sigh, because of course it's the west quarter. The west quarter is where everything gets worse. The houses lean like drunkards. The streets flood when someone sneezes. The dogs are angry. The chickens are missing feathers. And the people are mostly too tired to be angry unless you're late. You start with the courtyard outside the tavern. There's a pile of fish heads, some broken teeth, and what might be a cursed doll made of turnips. You don't ask, you just shovel. By the time you reach the alley behind the tanners, the light is beginning to fade. Ned is limping, his boot ripped 2 hours ago, and now he's stuffing straw into it to keep out the slime. You should stop, but you don't, because this job doesn't stop. You reach the final house in the west quarter, a small shack with a crooked chimney and an outhouse that looks like it was built by a man with no regard for physics or shame. There's a woman standing outside. Her eyes are sunken, but her posture is proud. Are you here for the heap, she asks. You nod. She gestures behind the house. You walk around and stop, because what greets you is not a pile, it's a mound, waist high, covered in flies, swarming like they've formed a council and declared this their capital. You blink. Someone died under there. Ned whispers. You grab your rake and start. It takes an hour. Your arms ache, your knees buckle, and your soul questions every decision that brought you here. But when you finish, the path is clear. The woman nods once, then disappears inside without another word. No thank you, no coin, just silence. You respect it. Some people pay in gratitude, some people pay in coin, and some people just endure. Like you return to the yard in darkness, unload the sacks, rinse the tools, try not to breathe through your nose. Tom is there, already back from cesspit duty. He hands you a half loaf and a mug of something that might be mead or boiled turnip water. You drink it without asking, because it's warm. And after a day like today, that's enough. You sit by the fence, watch the stars. Somewhere in the city, the bells chime softly. You think about the people who'll walk clean streets tomorrow, Who'll pass the square and smell only bread? Who'll never know what was scraped from under their windows? You smile because they don't need to know. They just need to live. And you made that possible. Tomorrow, there will be more. More piles, more scraping, more alleyways that reek of forgotten sins. But tonight, you rest. You survived. The city did too. And for now, that's enough. The city sleeps, but you can't. Because tonight, your name is on the rota for the lower tenements. And that means the submerged privies. The ones built over soft ground. The ones with wooden lids long past their expiration. The ones that, on a bad day, bite back. You eat a handful of dried peas from your pouch, chew without tasting. Tom and Ned are already loading the cart. Quiet for once. No jokes tonight. Just the hush of dread that settles in when you know what kind of work is coming. Tonight, you're dealing with the worst kind of cesspit. Not the big castle basins, they're predictable. Not the open latrine trenches, they're straightforward, if smelly. But these are the privy boxes perched behind crooked homes, made from rotting planks and inherited hope, suspended like gallows over pits that haven't been emptied in years. The locals don't call them privies, they call them coffin lids, and not without reason, because every year, someone falls in. You roll through the lower quarter in silence. The roads narrow, the cobbles give way to mud. Everything smells like cabbage and shame. Your first stop is behind a 2-story hovel, wedged between a tannery and a workshop that sells second-hand nails. A woman meets you there, lantern in hand. It's full again, she says. You nod. She doesn't need to explain. You see the dark streaks oozing from the base of the box. You hear the slow drip, drip, drip of something inside that sounds like rot made liquid. You approach the privy slowly. You test each plank with your boot before shifting your weight. You've learned. Historians still debate whether Richard the Raker fell through by accident or pure stupidity. But in your view, he probably rushed, and rushing gets you swallowed. You drop to your knees and lift the lid. The smell hits first. It always does. This one is peculiar. A rich, loamy scent beneath the usual horror. Earthy. Almost like mushrooms if mushrooms were cursed. You lower your bucket, hand over hand on the rope, into the void. It splashes. You wince. Pull it up. It comes slow too slow. Something's clinging to it. You brace your foot, yank hard and the bucket clears the edge, slopping its contents across your boot. You don't curse. You don't scream. You just breathe out through your mouth and dump it in the cart. Ned grimaces, 1 down. You nod. 6 more tonight. The 5th pit is the worst. You already know it when you see the house cracked bricks, door hanging sideways, chimney puffing smoke into the building instead of out. The privy is propped against the outer wall, supported by a single beam and divine optimism. Tom eyes it warily. That's not stable. You agree, but you don't say it, because the pit is full, and no one else is coming. You approach, bucket in hand. The moment you open the hatch, the entire thing groans like a dying ox. Quick in, quick out, Tom says. You nod, lower the bucket, halfway down a crack, a snap, then silence. And then, before you can react, the floor gives out. Not completely, not dramatically, just enough. The plank beneath your left foot vanishes. Your leg plunges into the pit, up to the thigh. Cold, slick, horrifying. You scream more from surprise than pain, and flail until Ned grabs your shoulder and hauls you back. You land on your back in the mud, leg dripping with something older than memory. Everyone's silent. Then Tom mutters, "We're going to have to burn that boot." You laugh, because if you don't, you'll cry. Back at the yard, you strip out of the ruined clothes behind the fence. There's a barrel of lye water, waiting for just this purpose. It stings, but it cleans mostly. You toss the boot onto the pile of others, like it the boot graveyard. Dozens of souls, half melted, forever reeking. You don't sleep tonight, not really. Instead, you sit on the crate outside your shed, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, philosophers are debating the nature of the soul. Alchemists are trying to turn lead into gold. Poets are composing odes to unreachable women. And you're calculating the structural load-bearing capacity of rotten planks. Romantic in its own way, you look at your hands, calloused, scarred, still trembling slightly. You remember your father, hands just like these, teaching you how to balance a bucket, how to listen for the creak that means stop and the splash that means too late. He died in a pit. Of course, not a dramatic fall, just a slow slide. One wet night when the mud was deeper than usual and the rope slipped through his fingers. You were 12. You finished the shift. You always finish the shift. At dawn, the church bells ring, a slow mournful tone. Someone important has died. You wonder briefly if it's the bishop. He once called you a necessary blight. You'll miss him. You stand, stretch and sigh. The rota for the next week is pinned to the wall near the tool shed. Your name is everywhere. Day shift, night shift, scavenging, cesspits, rat patrol on Thursday. You trace the list with a fingertip, wonder, idly, what would happen if you just stopped? But you don't stop, because no one else knows how to do this right. And someone has to care that the buckets don't tip, that the ropes don't snap, that the children climbing down after coins don't drown in the dark. You tuck the rota into your coat and head for the gate. You've still got one more pit to check before breakfast, and you promised the apothecary's wife you'd look for her wedding ring. She dropped it last week, down the privy. Of course, you reach her home just as the sun breaches the rooftops. She greets you with forced cheer, offers you boiled oats and a mint sprig for your trouble. You nod politely, decline the food except the mint. The privy is narrow, stone-lined and cold, at least it's structurally sound. You lower your hook into the pit, scrape gently, nothing. You shift angles, scrape again. A glint, something metallic. You fish it out. It's a spoon. You clean it, set it aside. Try again. Another glint. Not the ring, a brooch, bent, still crusted. Finally, on the fifth pass, you snag something soft, heavy. You pull it up. A chain, a gold band. The ring. You wipe it on your sleeve. It sparkles in the morning light. Despite everything, you hand it to the apothecary's wife. She gasps, covers her mouth, then hugs you tightly, without fear. It's the first time someone's touched you in weeks. You blink, say nothing, then turn and leave. The mint sprig still clutched in your hand, because sometimes, even in a world made of waste, you pull treasure from the depths. And sometimes, the treasure is kindness. The mint sprig wilts by midday. You carry it in your pouch anyway. Next to the copper bits and a bent spoon you're still not sure isn't cursed. It doesn't smell anymore. It gave up, but it's a reminder not everything pulled from the dark has to be discarded. The sun today is hot. Not pleasantly warm, hot angry, punishing. Direct from God. God hot. The kind of heat that turns chamber pots into stew and cesspits into cauldrons of bubbling evil. You tug your tunic higher over your nose. Not that it helps. Heat makes everything worse, especially the gas. You've known many dangers in your line of work. Slippery ledges, collapsed planks, wild dogs guarding alleyway toilets. But nothing unnerves you quite like the silent enemy beneath every pit methane. It's invisible, odorless when pure, but oh so flammable. And when it builds up under layers of rotting waste boom, the stories are whispered like ghost tales around the fire. You've heard about the gong farmer in Norwich who lit a pipe too close to the pit and exploded. Or the one in York who thought the hiss meant a leak and leaned in, never leaned out. Historians still debate how many cesspit deaths were gas-related versus just bad luck. But you felt it, the tingle on your skin, the unnatural warmth of the air, the way a torch suddenly burns blue. You don't use torches anymore. Instead, you bring Ned and a long, slim reed. You lower it into the pit slowly, watching for tremors. If the reed comes back wet and the surface bubbles, you know there's build-up. Careful, Tom warns, his voice barely above a whisper, as you lower your bucket into a large pit behind the Guildhall. It's always careful. You mutter, "This pit hasn't been emptied in 3 years." You know this because the Guild keeps records. Neat. tidy scrolls that note things like quarterly paving and privy attendant rotation. There's even a line about how the merchants prefer not to be disturbed by night workers, which is funny, because one wrong move here and they'll all be very disturbed. You feel resistance halfway down, a thick layer of congealed sediment. That's where the gas collects trapped like a beast beneath a blanket. You pause, listen, no sound. But the air feels tight. You whisper to Tom Bucket's too short. We need the hook. He nods and passes you the iron claw. You lower it slowly, gently twisting as it sinks. No sudden plunges, no jabs. You pray without words to every saint of muck you can remember. When the hook catches, you wince. You begin to pull. It's heavy, denser than usual, and warm. Not like body heat warm, like oven warm. Your hand trembles. Ned's eyes widen. You smell that. You nod. It's subtle, but unmistakable, the sulphur kiss of something waiting to ignite. You halt. Drop a cloth, you say. Tom obeys. You wrap the rope in the wet linen, using it as a heat guard. Then, slowly, inch by inch, you lift the bucket. The muck sloshes. You freeze. It sloshes again, but nothing bursts. You exhale carefully. The air is still thick, but manageable. You dump the bucket into the barrel and wait. Still nothing. No hiss, no flash. You got lucky. Very lucky. Back in the alley. You lean against the wall and sip from a flask. It's water. Technically, you call it courage. Tom sits beside you, wiping his brow. You think it was close, he asks. You nod. Close enough. Closer than last time. Let's not keep a ranking. Ned appears, holding a scorched reed. He shrugs. Little warm. Not glowing. You chuckle. New standard for safety, not glowing. You head next to the laundry district. Rich folk clothes. Poor folk chamber pots. The workers here treat you with polite detachment, like you're part of the architecture unseen, essential, and vaguely resented. You're called to a communal latrine that's backed up into the wash trough. Several angry women await, arms folded, accusing you of doing your job late. When, in fact, they never sent word until today. You don't argue, you just nod, roll up your sleeves, and start scooping, because arguing with people who've just had their laundry re-scented by human waste is a losing battle. The trough itself isn't deep, but the backup has caused complications. The runoff has seeped into the drainage stones. That means digging, that means chipping, that means bending over so long your spine begins composing a formal letter of protest. Ned tries to help, but slips and lands face first in what is definitely not mud. You give him a day off. He earns it. Later that evening, you revisit the pit behind the abandoned mill. It's been weeks since you were last here, but something about it nags at you. A smell, a sound, a memory. You lower your hook, expecting the usual, but something catches differently. You pull, and what comes up isn't a clump of waste. It's a boot, still laced, still filled. You freeze, because boots don't crawl into cesspits on their own. You send Tom for the bailiff. They arrive with a scribe and a cloth to cover their noses. You stand nearby, watching as they extract what's left of a man, clothes rotted, face gone, but fingers still clutching a coin pouch. The bailiff inspects it. Murder. You shake your head. Could be, or a fall. Robbery gone wrong, or right. Depending on your view, they nod, as if you've solved something. But the truth is, you've seen worse. You've found rings with fingers still inside. You've pulled bones from places that should never see daylight. The cesspit holds secrets because people know no one wants to look, except you, because someone has to. You head home early that night. You scrub harder than usual, not to remove the stink, but the memory. But some things cling, not just on the skin, in the soul. You lie awake longer than usual, listening to the distant bells, the muffled snoring from Ned's cot, the occasional splash of a rat in the runoff drain. And you wonder how many more near misses before one isn't a miss at all. You think about the methane, the pit heat, the boot. You think about the woman's hug, the ring. You think about the reed glowing faintly, just once. And then, just before sleep takes you, you whisper into the dark, not tomorrow, because tomorrow You'll double check the ropes, you'll wait 10 seconds longer, you'll wear gloves, even if they tear, because in your job, almost only counts in graveyards. And you're not ready for your name to be forgotten in a pile of rot. Not yet, not tonight. The morning mist clings low to the ground, like a guilty conscience. You rise earlier than usual. Your joints stiff from too many nights on wet wood, and too few full hours of sleep. Ned snores in the corner of the shed, and you let him. The boy's earned his rest. You, however, can't sit still. There's one last cesspit on the week's list. Technically not your shift. Technically not your responsibility. But you've been thinking about it. It's the old bishop's house. The place is mostly abandoned now. Ever since the holy man passed, and the new one decided to live closer to the cathedral and farther from the smell. But the pit behind the house hasn't been emptied in over 5 years. It's legendary. Teachers warn students about it. Apprentices joke that if you fall in, you emerge as a new religion. And yet, no one's touched it. Until today, you pack lightly. Hook, reed, gloves, what's left of them. No Ned, no Tom, just you, the tools, and the kind of foolish resolve that creeps in when you've survived everything else and want to tempt fate one more time. The air near the bishop's house is different. Still, watchful, like the building knows you're coming and disapproves. You half expect the old man's ghost to appear and ask what you're doing poking about where you weren't invited. But you knock on the wood anyway. Habit. No one answers. The privy is still standing, though barely. The stone walls are bowed, and the door hangs ajar. Inside, cobwebs web across beams like accusations. You step over a pile of forgotten sermons and lift the lid, and you stop, because the pit, it's full, not just physically, but metaphorically. It smells like forgotten rituals and old sins, like incense mixed with regret, like time tried to cover it up, but ran out of linens. You lower your reed slowly. It trembles, warms, but doesn't glow. That's something. You sit beside it and wait. Sometimes it's not about digging. Sometimes it's just about being there, bearing witness to what others won't, holding space for the rot, the waste, the accumulation of things no one wanted to face. That's your job. That's always been your job. You think about your name never written down, never carved, never sung. The city won't remember you. No statues, no songs, but it will be cleaner, and maybe that's enough. You return to the yard as the sun rises fully. Tom is fixing a wheel. Ned is asleep on a pile of sacks. Someone's hung your tunic from last night over the fence. It's dry now, but the stains remain. You don't mind. Stains are proof that something happened, that you were here. A new apprentice arrives, skinny as a rake and smelling faintly of vinegar. He stares at you like you're a myth. You offer him the smaller rake and a half loaf of bread. He grins, missing 2 teeth. Good. He'll fit in the weeks that follow. The city changes. A new street is paved. A fountain is built where the old waste trench used to be. Children play where once you shoveled silence. The baker expands his stall. The mayor declares that the lower quarter is more fragrant than ever. No one mentions your name, but you see the footprints you don't have to clean. You hear the laughter that doesn't echo off filth. You notice that, for the first time in years, no one falls ill from the alley near the fishmongers. That's your legacy. That's your monument. Not stone, not metal, clean cobbles. Historians still argue over what to call you. Gong farmer, scavenger, waste man, sanitation pioneer. Some laugh, some shudder, some forget. But every city has one. A nameless figure in the dark, holding the line between function and failure. The quiet hands beneath civilization's delicate dance. You're the reason the nobles don't slip in filth on their morning strolls. You're the reason the churches smell of candle wax and not contagion. You're the reason people can afford to forget what lies below. And while others build palaces, you empty pits. While others write laws, you clean consequences. You are, in a word, indispensable. They may never thank you, but you don't need thanks. You just need a good rope, a steady hand, and enough space in your soul to carry what the world discards. Tonight, the stars are bright, the wind is soft. The pit lids are all closed. You sit on the stoop, sipping something sweet you didn't ask for, but received anyway. The woman from the West Quarter brought it quiet, without words, just a nod. You sip and think maybe it was all worth it. Not for glory, not for riches, but for that one moment when someone saw you. Tomorrow, the rot will return. It always does. But so will you. Boots tied, gloves patched, reed ready, because some people run from the smell. But you built your life in it. And somehow, against every odd, you made it sacred. And now, your work is done. The shovel rests against the shed. The lantern flickers low, and the streets lie silent, cleaner than before. Thanks to hands the city never names, you sit in the stillness of twilight, where the wind is soft and the stars blink slow above rooftops that no longer reek. Your body may ache, but your spirit is lighter than it's been in weeks. Close your eyes. You can still hear the gentle drip of water in a distant trough, the soft rustle of a burlap sack settling against a wooden beam, the sleepy sigh of someone too tired to dream. Let those sounds cradle you. Let them wrap around your shoulders like a worn but faithful cloak. Tomorrow, there will be new messes, new piles, new corners that need your quiet touch. But for now, in this rare moment of rest, you are allowed to just be. Not the shoveler, not the cleaner, just a human, breathing slow beneath the stars. And as sleep gently drifts toward you, bringing with it the peace you've earned 10 times over. Remember, even if no one saw what you did, the world is better because you were there. So rest. The night is clean. You can finally close your eyes. Good night.